Hey guys, I am DM Zone. This is Gamer's Oasis. Let's get into it. In this video, we're going to talk about the Paladin. The Paladin came out in Supplement 1 Greyhawk. It was not one of the original classes that came out, much like the Thief. There will be other videos like this coming out in the future. One of the first things I want to add to this video is that they might have added rules within the description of this that apply across the game, or maybe insights into how the game was actually thought of and perceived by the people who made the game. We'll get into that in just a minute though. So one of the things they did with this new class is they went ahead and added it to the men on the encounter chart. So when you rolled a man, there's a potential that now paladins could be one of the things that come after you. Paladins are also not necessarily what you think they are, even though this is the origin of it and a lot of familiarity. If you were to describe the class, you probably would get it. You would have a hard time with some of the things that are in here. Like, for example, there is no distinction saying that other classes and races can't be a part of this. So, for example, a elf be a paladin, that would fill the fighter side of it, but then they would become a magic user. Potentially, if you could explain it well enough, they could also become one of the 3 class elves and actually be a thief as well. You could even go so far to take the magic user side away and turn that into a cleric, and you could be a paladin, cleric, thief, as odd as that might be. Now, that's being a little bit silly. However, a dwarf could be a paladin because a dwarf can be a fighter. Same thing with halflings. So halfling paladins could actually be a thing. And if they were dual classing or changed their class when they got max level into thief, they would then continue to be able to be a thief potentially forever. So there is a lot of really cool things that went into this. Some of the restrictions that are there is you must have a 17 in charisma and you must always remain lawful. And the actual quote from the book is to do lawful deeds. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that stands out very distinctly as a paladin. However, moving on, there are other things that stand out very paladin-like, such as lay on hands. 2 points per level can be healed per day on another character or on the paladin themselves if they need to be able to heal themselves. So while at lower levels it's not incredible, it gets pretty amazing quickly. Now, it doesn't distinguish whether or not this is something you can break up or if this is you hit one person with the full blast. I probably would side with it hits with the full blast. It's just a one-time thing. But that's my own personal opinion of a way to maybe regulate a little bit of how the healing is done. Why I say that is healing was meant to be difficult and finite and rare. For example, a Cure Light Wound spell is a full 10-minute spell. It's not cast in melee. Healing over time is 1 hit point per day. If you are in a hospital, and some people question whether the first day actually counts, or if it's after the first day, your timer starts, a full 24-hour period. So yeah, I would make it probably not so incredibly powerful as just 2 hit points here and 2 points there and cap you off here. I think that's a modern feel that I wouldn't want. Now, one of the other great things about this is that paladins are immune to disease. Now, to actually quote the book, it says paladin themselves are not subject to disease, as if they are not going to submit to, or that their god does not recognize the fact that disease could actually affect them. Beyond that, every 5 levels, so I'm assuming the first one is at 5th level, the second one's at 10th level, they are able to do a cure disease. This also is why I think that lay on hands is a once-time thing. This is part of the lay on hands ability. I wouldn't necessarily say it's either or in this situation because you have to wait the 5th level to be able to do it. But I do feel like that this is a thing that is limited. The book goes a little bit off script of what they've been saying certain things are, and maybe shows us behind the curtain a little bit to see what's actually going on behind there. When it talks about the paladins have increased save throws, specifically it says that paladins have a 10% save throw against all forms of attacks, excluding melee. What? What kind of save throws do we have? It they don't even show you what dice to use in save throw. You have to go find that in another part talking about item save throws. Why are they talking about melee attacks having a save throw? In my opinion, it's sort of a hit miss binary type of thing, and this is what they were actually getting at. And this was maybe like when the bugbear was made and they said it has a pumpkin like head, and the artist literally drew a pumpkin for a head on the bugbear. It's that this is where that communication comes in. They're trying to describe the rules, and this is the interpretation of the person who wrote this specific part, who we believe to be mostly Gygax, but obviously I don't think Gygax wrote this particular section. I'm showing this twice and kind of specifically because to me it also answers some questions on how they viewed the game. So if you view melee attacks as a save throw, which is a bit odd, like I said, it doesn't actually roll dice to save, but it is a target number you have to beat. And I feel like that, this would apply then to ranged. So it specifically says does not apply to melee. However, ranged attacks that are physical, obviously we're saying all spells, staves, the wands, dragon breath, that it gets bonuses to that. But what I'm talking about specifically is range attacks. If a person's trying to shoot a paladin with a bow, would their armor class be 2 better? This does fall in that 5% per level because it's a d20, making it a 10%, which is about the only place you're ever going to find this 10% number. I'm not saying that you're not going to get close when you're rolling 2d6 because there are different numbers for each one and it's going to be fairly close, but there is no specific 10% of the time this dice will be rolled type of thing, let alone across the spectrum. Also, on a 1d6 system, there is no 10%. Every pip of the dice, every roll, every number is guy's value of 16 point whatever it is exactly percent of a chance of going off. And so that's not what they're talking about. So they're not talking about mass combat and chainmail. They're not talking about man-to-man or fantasy combat and chainmail. They're talking specifically about the alternative combat system. So if you're going to exclude melee specifically, that means to me you're adding 2 to the AC to every paladin for ranged. And I think that makes sense that a paladin would have to be fought in melee to be taken down, not shot with arrows to be taken down. I think that makes a lot more sense in my head of what a paladin should be. What I'll end all of this little tangent on is I wonder what else is on the cutting room floor. What didn't make it to the rules that would have explained so much more to us so that we'd understand the game maybe even better. So, moving on, we're going to talk about at 8th level, paladins are able to dispel evil, aka spells, undead, and evil enchanted monsters, and etc. Those type of things. Now, I went and looked into these spells specifically. I say these spells because the spell evil works almost exactly like the spell magic. Way too long of a topic to get into here. I'm going to have specific spell videos coming out talking about those spells when they come, but it's going to be a little bit for dispel evil, so I'll just kind of get into what my thoughts are on that real quickly here. So basically, it removes the evil from the thing, but then leaves the thing there. So if you're dispelling an undead, like a zombie, the zombie hits the ground unanimated and has no evil in it. It has no animation, no magic there. It can be reanimated, but it's not going to stand up when the spell duration ends. The evil has been pulled from it and is completely gone. If you were to bury that person, they would have a normal burial, and whatever happened to them in the afterlife would probably continue to happen to them in the afterlife if one were to go down that road. For whatever reason, they didn't do this in order. A little disjunct, shall we say, but they talk about the fact that paladins have the ability of detect evil. This is a thing that they basically do at will. The wording again is a little clumsy, but essentially they say they want to do it and they do it. So if a paladin wants to walk around with this on, then he can have probably less awareness of what's going on while he is doing this, but he probably would be able to determine every person walking up to him if they themselves are evil. Would this require some sort of prayer or action? I would side with yes. This isn't something you want happening just walking through town in a social setting unless the paladin was doing some sort of chant of protection per se, so that he'd be able to see who was truly evil and that type of thing. Now, switching it from truly evil going into holy, let's talk about holy swords. Now, for those of you who are my age who came up in AD&D 2nd Edition, you'll know Holy Swords and immediately think of the Holy Avenger, which was a sword that was more powerful in the hands of a paladin but could be wielded by basically anyone. Generally, these were +5. We made different versions because in the hands of a paladin back then, it was double the bonuses, so a +5 become a +10. It's a different game. We're not doing that in this one. However, it does not make the Holy Avenger, the static holy sword that you can find, any less powerful, in my opinion. You see, there are technically 3 different types. There's the holy sword, there is the sword of sharpness, and then there is the vorpal sword. All 3 of these have their own specific extra abilities they get to taking additional limbs, shall we say, and heads, while still maintaining the holy sword function. Now, the holy sword itself is a +5. The other 2 are +1 and +2 respectively. And when a paladin is wielding a sword that is holy and is considered to be a holy sword, himself and everyone within 10 feet is going to be covered in an anti-magic shell that protects them from all forms of magic. I assume this is a great way to troll and to make your wizard mad, your magic user mad, because you strip them of all of their spells, which might be why certain races don't like the paladin that way. I don't know. But that is probably a thing that you'd have to decide if it's hostile magic or if he allows certain magic or if it's just no magic and it's an fully anti-magic shell. There are degrees you want to consider when you think of this and not just go with the absolute, because an anti-magic thing that can be called upon at will if you hold an item is incredibly powerful, and that may or may not be something you want to introduce to your world. Okay, speaking of things you don't want to introduce to your world, we're going to talk about the Book of Vile Darkness. Yes, for a paladin, this is an absolute terrible thing. It is worse for them than it is for anyone else. As a matter of fact, if they touch it, it becomes a cursed item that they do not want to put down until they lose their paladinhood, which happens 24 hours later. If they do not have the proper magic cast upon them, it is an absolute, I'm sure, devastating process, as the paladin literally has his paladinhood or her paladinhood stripped from them, and they can never become a paladin again. Now, not to carry on and be carried away with this too much, we're going to talk about paladin mounts, and I swear my silly dad jokes will end at some point in time. I'm not sure when. But These are mounts that the paladin can summon. I don't believe them to be instantaneous. I believe they say, I want my mount, in whatever prayer form they do, and then it occurs over a certain amount of time, which the referee would determine to be appropriate. There is no specifics in this. It's very loosely worded, probably narratively explained. However, the one thing it is for sure is that when you summon it, you have to wait 10 years to be able to summon a new one. Now, I personally believe that the paladin should be able to send their mount away and it wanders off and then eventually fades away, probably going to some personal plane of positivity that the horse can go and eat and navigate. And then the paladin can then summon it back, allowing them to travel from one side of Mordor to the other side of Mordor, kind of like Gandalf with Shadowfax, and be able to summon Shadowfax on the other side of the mountain without actually having to traverse all of Moria with Shadowfax, potentially with Bob the pony, and then, it doesn't make it, oops, and then your paladin mount dies. I think this makes a lot of sense to me. That's how I would run it. However, these mounts are meant to be slightly better than normal mounts, and for sure they are. They are 5+1 hit dice. I believe the normal war horse is like 3+1 hit dice, and riding horses are far less. They can move 18 inches versus 12 inches, which I've heard described as the distance a dwarf can run. So a horse runs twice as fast, or moves twice as fast as a dwarf can run, or a dwarf can run for 2 rounds and will go the same distance as a horse. I actually feel like that's a little that's not right. I feel like a horse is way faster than that. But hey, I'm going off into the weeds here. A paladin's horse can go 18 inches in that same amount of time. Also, it talks about the fact that they are highly intelligent. They don't put parameters on that. I personally see most animals as being less than a 3 intelligence, and I would not apply intelligence fully. I believe that there is like a recall memory, and then there's the ability to learn new things. I believe that a paladin's horse probably has a better recall, and it's not out there necessarily inventing things because it has a 5 intelligence. I think it remembers things, probably like a 12 intelligence, like a human. However, it's not creating the new, tool that is needed for horses to be able to do blacksmithing. But I do believe it knows the difference between that person and that person, and probably remembers conversations that has been had. So a little bit of a distinction in an intelligence and like an awareness type of thing, shall we say. But that's where I would kind of side with things. However, I have used actually semi paladin mounts already in my world. If you go back and watch the character creation and the background story where I talk about my elf, right? The elf in that one did exceptionally well and was able to get something specific and cool. What they got was this horse that had the ability to move a little bit faster than other horses and was slightly intelligent. Where a paladin horse would be like a 12, this guy's probably like a 7. And where a paladin horse moves in an 18, I actually had this one moving at a 16. It also was a riding horse because I didn't want to start off my elf with a warhorse. However, if they wanted to be able to make it a warhorse, which they did before the end of the season, I guess you could say, of me doing my solo play, then they would be able to spend the time training and the money to educate and to build their horse into a warhorse, which is one of the things they did. Now, going back into the last but certainly not least, and maybe some more behind the scenes being shown, behind the curtains being shown to us. It says that paladins are restricted by how many magic items they can have. This does not count towards the armor they can wear, and up to 4 weapons that they're able to carry. What? 4 weapons? When did it become so specific? Um, I believe this is that look behind the scene there to see that. They probably had where you could have 50 weapons on you, but you were only able to actually access 4 of them at a time. Why would I say 50? How are you going to be? Because you had 50 daggers. And you're not going to be able to hold 50 daggers in your belt, but you could have them in your backpack. You could have them in a special box you carry. And then you could have 4 daggers on you, and then you could use those daggers to throw. But to be able to access the next one, you're going to have to spend some time. That's the type of thing that I view that as. Or a pole arm and a crossbow and then a dagger and then a warhammer or something. I feel like those type of things. Oh, shields don't count towards paladins as well. Very important, because a shield would be a thing they would have. Anyways, so I think this kind of gives you an idea into looking at that. And most adventurers will have a hand axe tied to their backpack or a small pit hammer type of thing, so they can do pits and hammering pits into the wall and these type of things that adventurers would do. So this is sort of my rough overlay. I'm going to go back into these classes a little bit more when I talk about the race updates and all this type of stuff. So look for that video coming up soon. That'll be my next long video I do. And then we'll go ahead and jump into that in the future. Did I get this right? Did I get this wrong? Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. Keep rolling those dice and have a good day.